Let's talk about poliovirus. Poliovirus is a type of virus that causes, you guessed it, polio. Poliovirus is a type of enterovirus with an RNA genome that enters during kind of ingestion by fecal-oral route, meaning if you eat something contaminated with waste products, that is kind of how you get polio. Less commonly, it can be got by contact, by coughs or sneezing, but the main one is eating or otherwise consuming contaminated materials. Largely water, but also food and other things like that. Now, it does replicate and do its kind of virus activities in the gastrointestinal area, but it has a lot of symptoms causing a lot of problems. Now, polio was the most prevalent and common in the late 19th century and early mid-20th century, being very, very common in the 1940s and 50s. Now, not all cases of polio are very, very dangerous. About 5% or so of the cases are called abortive polio, and they only really have like mild flu-like symptoms, including headache, cough, kind of a little bit of a fever. In slightly more severe cases of the abortive polio, it includes things like vomiting and diarrhea, but symptoms usually only last 2 or 3 or so days. Now, there is another slightly more severe version of polio called non-paralytic polio, which affects about 1% of the people infected, causing just kind of muscle stiffness, difficulty moving your neck and back, as well as muscle weakness and difficulty moving, and pretty severe headaches. But then there's also the fortunately rarest but definitely most severe form of polio, the paralytic polio. It kind of starts out the same as the abortive and the non-paralytic polio, with similar symptoms that rapidly progress into much worse symptoms. Those symptoms include intense pain and sensitivity, and inability to move muscles at all, resulting in paralysis, especially respiratory muscles, which results in not being able to breathe. And that is where our friend the iron lung comes in. They are artificial respirators for people infected with polio that could not breathe on their own and had to be kept inside this big metal respirator in order to survive. Now, historically, polio was a massive problem with a decently high death rate and an even higher disability rate because it did leave long-lasting symptoms. People were paralyzed and unable to move, either partial or full paralysis. They had long-lasting respiratory problems and chronic pain, and that's even if they did survive. Now, fortunately, polio does have a vaccine. It was developed in the mid-1950s, and then there was a very widespread vaccination campaign in an effort to eradicate the disease. And while not fully eradicated, especially in underdeveloped countries, it is much, much less prevalent thanks to said vaccine. And for a while, in most developed countries, in most Western areas, it was fully eradicated, essentially. However, due to the anti-vaccination movement, guess what's coming back? Who would have thought? Fucking polio. Since vaccinations in general, and especially the polio vaccine, is not mandatory anymore, people are opting out of vaccinating their children, which has led to a comeback of multiple diseases that have not really been a concern in a very, very long time, including polio, which is not super okie dokie because this is a very, very severe disease, potentially leading to death or long-lasting trauma and disability. Now again, this, much like things like scarlet fever and measles and mumps and rubella and all of that, were very, very prevalent in more historical times. They have not been around for the past 40, 50 or so years due to, you guessed it, vaccinations. But with the anti-vax movement, these diseases are making a comeback, which is oh so fun to have your child and potentially others in your community get sick from a disease that hasn't really been seen since the 40s. So, if you do not want to see your child or other loved ones in the modern equivalent of this iron lung, vaccinate your goddamn children.